for you, a daily podcast that shines a light on the American justice system and its role in empowering the powerful to take from you. The justice system is the only branch of your government where an individual, rather than the collective, can make the system act for you. It puts power in the individual's hands, but it's broken and being used against you at a time when you need it most.
And we are live on Who Wrote That Up For You. Today is Monday, November 7th, 2022. I'm Sonia Ebron, co-founder at Courtroom 5.
And I'm Deborah Sloan, the other co-founder at Courtroom 5.
We have a delightful show lined up for you today. In a few moments, we'll speak with Mike Whelan. Mike is the author of Lawyer Forward. It is a guide to help lawyers find their place in the future of law. So excited to have that conversation with Mike. Before we get there, though, Deborah, what is on your mind today? What's our issue of the day?
Well, the issue of the day is court fees. And I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but I wanted to go deeper in talking about the court fees that just make it difficult for people without a bunch of money to address anything in the courts. And for civil fees, sometimes there are fees for, of course, witnesses. Witnesses may charge you to come, but also filing fees have gone up quite a bit. Sometimes you have to, once you're in court, even as a defendant, you might have to file. You may have to pay a fee to file a motion or to oppose a motion and so on. But the worst part is in civil cases where in like traffic cases where there's a fee, and if you don't pay the fee, you basically could go to jail. There's an example of this woman in Lexington County, South Carolina, Twanda Brown. She was ordered to pay roughly $2,300. She said I could only afford $50. She's a single mom. And she said I could only afford $50 a month, but they insisted that she pay 100. So she started to pay the $100 a month until her son got sick, and she just basically stopped paying because it was just too much for her to do. And so they put out a warrant. They arrested her. She spent time in jail. And it's a tax basically on poor people. It's a way they found to punish poor people where they cannot punish rich people in that same way, or even people, middle class people. There are certain people that are punished just because they don't have a certain amount of money. She's sued in federal court against the county, which is a good thing, which is, at least she's fighting back. But that shouldn't happen where, okay, they want you to pay the bill, but they also want to punish you. And the best way to punish a poor person is money. But what's the best way to punish everybody else? So, you know,
Yeah,
that's my issue.
it's a big
Mhm.
issue. It's one that really we could talk about every day because this just keeps happening over and over. And there's so many levels and layers to it. It's almost like you fix one problem and there's a shell game going on there. I'm just thinking, for instance, you mentioned she sued in federal court, and she likely filed her complaint IFP, informer pauperous, right? Because she didn't have a lot of money. And there is a special level of scrutiny for pro se
Mm,
litigants who file IFP. So she
yes.
may not get a hearing at all there simply because she can't pay the filing fee. There are just so many layers to this. It's criminal. It's what it is.
Yes, it
It's
is.
simply not worthy of a great country. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. As I said, we could probably talk about this particular issue every day on this show. So at any rate, Who Wrote That Up For You is sponsored by Courtroom 5. At Courtroom 5, we believe the courts belong to the people, in particular to the people who use them. And we, the people, are coming to claim our courts. So if you are in court without a lawyer, or you need to sue someone and can't find a lawyer to represent you, get yourself over to courtroom5.com. Try a limited version of our services for free, and we hope to provide some relief for you there. At this time, it is my great pleasure to welcome onto the show Mike Whelan. Mike is a lawyer, spent some time in logistics, and is now the author of Lawyer Forward. Again, a guide for solo law practices to find their place in the future of law. Mike, welcome to Who Wrote That Up For You. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'll warn you, I'm fighting off some kind of congestion, so I sound like a mix of Kathleen Turner and a Muppet. So you'll be very confused emotionally about how to feel about my voice today. But I'm happy to be with you and help support what you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. Mike, I gave just a brief snippet of your background, but if you would, give us a sense of where you've come from, how you came to Lawyer Forward, and it.
Yeah. Oh, my friend, that is a story. So I worked in logistics, like you mentioned, for about 10 years before I went to law school. And then at 30, I went to law school. I had taken, um, I took the L.
Technical.
I'm sorry, I lost you guys for a second. I have Deborah. Hi,
Hi,
Deborah.
Mike. Hi, Mike.
Do you want me to go ahead and
Go
answer the
ahead.
question?
Yes,
Yes.
go ahead, please.
Okay, sorry. So I worked in logistics for about 10 years, sort of figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I worked at Swift Transportation, and we got pregnant with our second child. And I told my wife, if I don't go back to school now, I'm never going to. And I just always had that as part of my identity. So I went to undergrad and I did Middle East studies, as you do. Initially, I went for dental school because that was how we justified the expense. But then I found out that the way dental kit, like they give each other shots in their mouths, like with needles in their face, the two
Oh,
other dental students. I was like, I'm not doing this. And so I shifted as logically as you do to Middle East studies. And really got to learn about what for me was a very new culture, a new experience. And then I went back into logistics after my bachelor's degree because that one doesn't really get you a job. And I wasn't really sure what to do next. And as a lot of smart kids with no plan do, I went to law school. It was, and maybe this will resonate for some of your viewers. It was a sure path to the middle class, right? I'm first
mm.
gen everything. My parents didn't go to college. None of their generation of my family did. So we didn't, we grew up with, go be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. And that's a path to the middle class. Little did I know and realize at the time the way student loans would pile up and put me in this position that, in the net, I've certainly lost money going to law school more than I've gained it. But, at this point, those student loan bills are monopoly money. I don't know how they're ever going to get paid, but that's another story. But yeah, I graduated. I went to Texas, which, I went in 2000 I went in September of 08 and it was October of 08 when the banks collapsed. And so I knew I was going to start my own practice. I started my own practice. I did the Children's Rights Clinic in law school, which is representing kids in child protective services cases. And then when I graduated, I opened my own practice and I did family law. And I did that for about 8 years in the Austin area. We served in the east side of Austin, which at the time, before it got super gentrified, was the low income part of Austin. Now it's as expensive as everything in California, which is irritating.
Mhm.
But yeah, I practiced on that side of town, and we tried all kinds of things to make family law more accessible for people there. And so that was my practice. And I just wasn't wired for it. It wasn't the environment for me. The systems level issues that make law broken for consumers were affecting me and other lawyers as well. And as I kept digging and exploring that, I came out with the book Lawyer Forward, which, among other things, talks about that, about the systems level effects and how it impacts lawyers and what we can do to change the system for all of us.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I imagine I missed a good bit of that. My apologies for the technical
It was
difficulties.
exhaustive. Yeah, there was a lot of words. You asked me what I do with my life. You're going to get a story, okay? Because I don't know.
I love it. I love it. Well, let me ask you this. What are some of the contemporary challenges, just writ large, for solo lawyers, particularly as they're trying to adapt to all of the disruption, all of the change that's happening in the industry?
Sure. I think, interestingly, most of the contemporary challenges are rooted in 100-year-old decisions, right? One of the things that I explore in the book is how we came to this model of practice that we have, where lawyers are sitting butt in seat, charging by the hour, trying to churn out practices, cases, and in our world, the we are only as good as our next case, or as our next hour. It's a very cash flow, very flow focused kind of industry. It's really hard to see people as individuals. The bad guy of the book Lawyer Forward is the capital C churn, I call it, because it
Mm,
churns all of us, right? It's the churn behind the boat. It's all of us who are being driven through that. And I think, I saw somebody recently say, it's not the legal tech, it's the culture that's the problem, right? It's not the opportunity for innovation, it's not the technology that allows for innovation, it's just that we are resistant as a culture. What I found as I wrote Lawyer Forward is a lot of that cultural baggage is rooted in the early 1900s, in the scientific management era. uh, Part of it is the education system changed at that time. We went from trying to raise up what we called at the time the gentleman lawyer, which obviously was the gentleman because only men were allowed to go to school at that point. But the idea of the gentleman lawyer, that you were there to think in a certain way, you had a methodology, you were processing information. It wasn't ownership of a chunk of knowledge. But with the change in legal education, it became ownership of a chunk of knowledge, of this idea that we know the law stuff. We're the law stuff people. And if you want access to the law stuff, you have to come to us. At that same time,
mm,
the administrative state sort of came out of nowhere. Corporations came out of nowhere. These things didn't really exist. That level of complexity didn't really exist pre 1900. And as that stuff grew, the borders around law became taller and taller, and they became harder to enter, which in some ways was good, right? We have a professionalization, a standardization of the law now that in some ways is a positive, but in many ways we don't see individuals anymore. We have to have these
mm,
massive systems that make decisions for all of us across a broad swath, and then on the flip side, we take these judges and we put them in tiny fiefdoms and tell them, you do what you need to do. And so we've got this conflict of standardization and flexibility that doesn't really seem to be working for anybody. And one of the things that I talk about
mm,
in the book in Lawyer Forward is that we as lawyers, and the book is targeted to lawyers, and I say at the beginning, it's not because they're the only ones who will make movement in the system, but because they're currently the protectors of the system. And of anyone, lawyers need to realize why the system is broken for everybody, not just for consumers. It's not just a do good activity. It is also self preservation. Lawyers are not doing okay. The levels of depression and alcoholism and suicide rates among lawyers is famously just sky high. So it's not working for anybody. And what I tried to do with Lawyer Forward was drive home, this is why, these are the systemic issues that are in the way. And if we want to talk about the future of law, it's on us to design that future.
What is the future of law as you see it?
It's a good question. And short version is I don't care, because I don't know, like I don't know, I can't. It's really hard to predict that. And I think if you talk to systems thinkers, if you talk to most people who think in these big pictures, the future is what it was, right? We are very likely to be tomorrow who we are today. That is true
mm,
of human nature, and that is true of human systems. It is very likely to continue to extrapolate to, President Obama talked a lot about the arc of justice. There is no arc of justice that runs itself. It is only human tugging that
mm,
changes that. The justice does not create itself. People create it, thinking strategically and thinking systemically. So, in answer to your question, I don't know what the future of law is, but what I hope it is more collaborative. I hope it is more individualized. And in the book, I brought my supply chain and logistics background to the legal practice and said, why do we do this thing where the lawyer owns the entire legal supply chain? Why do we do this thing
mm,
where the lawyer takes the phone call, they do the consultation, they do the reading, they give you the advice. They're who you get the counsel from. They answer the phone. If they don't answer the phone, do you know what's going on? You have to email your lawyer. Every time you email your lawyer, you're billed zero point 0.1 hours. That lawyer is the same lawyer who shows up in court for you and makes an argument in court. And when it doesn't go well, you call that. Why? Right? There are so few industries where that entire supply chain is owned by one person. And the real harm that I point out in the book is that consumers' expectations get to be whatever the heck they want to be, right? It's we as lawyers don't get to determine what consumers need. And what consumers need is deep expertise and accessibility. The problem is that those two things are in conflict. The person that you expect to be in a basement, becoming a super nerd, becoming the deep expert, cannot also answer your text messages, right? There is no way for that person to be the same person. And so what we've done as an industry is said, I don't care, right? That's what makes lawyers special, is that we can handle both of those. There have been several studies on the emotional labor of lawyers. Emotional labor is when you change your emotional state for the benefit of someone else while you're paid. So a lot of that research is rooted in flight attendants. So a flight attendant, the plane starts rocking, they have to change their face to make you feel good. They may be scared out of their mind, but they have to change their emotional state for your benefit. Lawyers have an ethical duty to own your problem, right? Which is an emotional labor. It's a similar emotion. That lawyer has no reason to give a crap about your life, right? They're not in your tribe. They're not your family. There is no sociological, anthropological reason for them to care about you other than that you gave them money. And so that lawyer has to emotionally adjust themselves. And the way lawyers typically will do that, and I know you've seen lawyers like this, they will either get so deep in that change that they will destroy themselves emotionally, that they will become heavily burdened. That's where a lot of that depression comes from, a lot of that alcoholism, or they will emotionally detach, where they will say, I don't care. You're just a number, right? You're just a part of a system. And it's that way. We're asking lawyers to do that because we're having them be both at the same time. We're saying, own the chunk of knowledge, be the deep expert, see the things that no one else can see, but also be emotionally available all the time, be a bad therapist, answer the text messages. So what I see as a future of law that I hope will happen is that we'll break up that supply chain and we'll start to say, wait, who's good at the emotional labor stuff? Have them do that. Who's good at trial? Have them do that. Who's good at taking files? Have them do that. Who's good at creating customer relationships like y'all do, right? That have them do that. Own the point of sale. That front interaction. It sounds crazy with small transactions. Uh, Lawyers will tell you can't do that because we don't have enough money to spread around 15 different providers. I'm sorry, that's just not true. I can go to Walmart and buy a $10 doll, and there were 40 players along the supply chain that got me that doll. Right? There's a scale question there that we can answer, but I think the supply chain is the way to fix this. Stop asking lawyers to be both expert and accessible at the same time.
I think you're really on to something there, Mike. I really, really appreciate that, and I'm fascinated by the logistics perspective. That most people in need of legal services can't afford them these days.
Sure.
That full representation, and that many lawyers, and in fact, the ABA is recommending that lawyers look at unbundled services or
Yep.
limited scope services. That what we do at Courtroom 5 is try to facilitate that by helping the client, if you will, do as much of the work as they can themselves so that they can hire a lawyer for some of these limited scope services, the more difficult stuff, right? Do you see that as, can you explain that maybe from a supply chain perspective,
Mm-hmm.
having the client participate, if you will, in the supply chain there?
Yeah, I will say to preface this, most lawyers can't afford a lawyer, right? If you look at lawyer salaries, we have what's called a bimodal distribution. So normally you see like a bell curve where the salaries are sort of in the middle. The majority of them, you see the big bulk of salaries, and there's some that are really high and there's some that are really low. Law doesn't have that. They have a really high peak around $70,000 a year, and they have a really high peak around $250,000 a year. And so a big chunk of lawyers are in middle and lower middle class. And when I practiced law, I couldn't afford an attorney. So it is broken for us as well. So I totally relate to that. To your question, unbundling is happening with your cable bill, right? You remember the days that, okay, I don't know if y'all are as old as me, but I remember the days when remember when they sold like 130 channels? You would get your channel package and there were 130 channels and you were like, what the heck are 90 of these channels? I've never even heard of tractortowing.com.tv or whatever. Like, why do I have this? So we were all bundled. All these things were priced together. And there are benefits to that. You could get a whole solution. You have the benefits of scale. So you can pay one flat rate and get all kinds of tractortowing.tv that you didn't know you needed. But we pushed against that. And we said, no, we want to unbundle, right? We want to get to the point where I can choose Hulu and Amazon Prime and Netflix, right? And so we did that. Now we're on the other side of that, where all of us, maybe this is just my household, I'm paying significantly more than I did when I just had a cable bill, right? We're paying for like 8 different kinds of content right now. Anyway, like my wife and I literally the other day, we spent 30 minutes trying to find something to watch. And then finally just were like, okay, we can't do this. I'm just going to go to sleep. But that's unbundling. You're dealing with unbundling every day in your
Yeah.
life where you're separating out. You see this with media, you see this with services. That's a trend, unbundling. You can do that in legal. You can say, you know what, I don't want to pay for the entire supply chain. I want to pay for the stuff that I desperately need. In an ideal world, you'd get to pick which pieces of that supply chain are the ones that you need, right? With law, it's sort of complicated because we have regulated relationships. In most courts, a person cannot represent themselves in probate, for example. So, as much as you want to say, hey, I'm going to go in and I'm going to represent myself in probate, I don't need a lawyer's help with that. I just need the forms. Sometimes you can't choose that, right? Sometimes, if you want to unbundle and get, say, a therapist involved in your divorce, which I think is great, right? To have this different package of services. If anything that therapist does looks anything like legal advice, well, now that therapist is in trouble. So the unbundling is a bit complicated because the systems we've created don't allow for that. But just like the cable bill, you can do the same thing with legal services. You can take, hey, if I've got a problem, I got to do this questionnaire, I got to fill out this form, I got to do these court documents, somebody's got to schedule the thing, somebody's got to file it, somebody's got to show up and make arguments and enter evidence, somebody's got to do the paperwork afterwards, et cetera, right? There's all these steps. You got to go file with the state, your child support, you got to set up the account. As a lawyer, I used to do all of those steps, right? Every single one of those steps, I was doing it. But I'm sorry, I don't read my own contracts, okay? When somebody gives me a contract, I literally always say, you guys have better lawyers than I do. I'll just sign it. I don't want to read the state's contracts about how you set up a form for getting your child support collected. There's no reason I should be doing that. I'm not uniquely good at it. I'm a very expensive way to file that document. Why am I filing that document? It makes no logical sense. Hire me for the thing that only I can do, right? And pay me for that. And you're going to pay me well because I'm an expert. So you're going to pay well for those minutes that you need me. There's no reason to pay me for the things you don't need me for. And so one strategy is to unbundle and to say, I'm going to pay Mike for these specific parts of the supply chain. I'm going to go to a lower cost or a more expert. It doesn't always have to be lower cost, right? We always had something called, when you split up assets in a divorce, now I can't even remember. It's been that long since I practiced, but when you split up assets in a divorce, there's a special document that you have to do. Well, there are some law firms that will only do that special document. That's what they do all the time. They know the financial vehicles, they know the investment vehicles, and so they only work with that document. So that's not cheaper, right? You don't end up paying less to get somebody to do that expert work per the hour, but it takes way fewer hours and they do way better product. So unbundling gives you the ability to decide, where do I want the expertise? And then the rest of the stuff, it's just customer service, and I can decide that I don't want that. I will say that is asking a lot. For people who want to unbundle, for me to say to somebody who's probably working 3 jobs and is barely making ends meet, hey, in the meantime, I want you to learn how the American legal system works and only hire me because you have the ability to decide what I'm best at, and you have the ability to project manage me being best at that and delivering that. This gets into something bigger, but obviously this this is endemic of poverty, that we're asking people who are poor to have enough time margin and money margin and patience margin to self-serve. So as much as I love self-service, we also have to recognize that there's some downside to that as well.
No question about it. For folks that can't afford a lawyer, as most of us can't, it's either that or lose your access
Right.
to the courts. And so, but absolutely, I really appreciate that explanation. You are hired, by the way. Appreciate your application there. That's fantastic.
We'll sell it.
Mike, where can people find you online? I'm going to share your website, lawyerforward.com, on the screen here. But where else can people find you online?
If you're a lawyer and you want to hang out, most of my time is spent helping lawyers. And again, not because I think lawyers are the only part of the system, but they are a part of the system. And that's the place that I've targeted to helping with. If you are not a lawyer and you just want to hear me rant about my garden dying in this weird, awful heat and see my puppy, we have a golden retriever, and how can you be upset around a golden retriever? It is in the Constitution. That can't happen. You could just go to my Twitter. I'm at Mike Whelan Jr. And yeah, that's me online.
That's awesome. Fantastic. Mike, thank you so much for your book, for the work you do with solo lawyers, and for sharing your wisdom and knowledge here. Who wrote that up for you? We'll have you again on soon.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, Mike.
Fantastic.
It's fascinating. Yes.
That is. There's a lot of work going on in making law practices better and more accessible for all of us. Deborah, what is our challenge for yesterday? Who won? And what do you have teed up for us today?
Friday's quiz. Which of the following is not a good method for putting evidence on the record in your case? Is it a complaint, witnesses, depositions, or interrogatories? And of course, the answer is a complaint is not a good method for putting evidence on the record in your case. The winner is Shavon L.
Congratulations to Shavon there.
And today's quiz, true or false? An affirmative defense explains why the defendant is not liable even if all the facts in the complaint are true. Is that statement true or false? If you want to participate in today's quiz, send your responses to quiz@courtroom5.com.
Fantastic. Looking forward to seeing the winning responses there. Fantastic. Well, thanks again to Mike Whelan Jr. At Lawyer Forward for his wisdom and sharing that with us today. That's all we have for you. As always, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you again tomorrow.
Are you feeling beleaguered, angry, or afraid, as if things are spinning out of control and you're powerless to stop them? It's easy to just let things slide and hope they don't get worse. But they often do get worse. The thing is, you're not powerless. Our courts belong to us, and their purpose is to give power to the powerless. Don't let your grievances pile up without redressing them. You can handle this in court. Or, if someone takes you to court, you can take them to school.